The human saved her when all hope seemed lost. Marek, a female Reman scientist, jolted awake in unfamiliar surroundings. Her last memory, the violent crash of her escape pod onto a desolate moon. Now she found herself in the cramped confines of an alien vessel, face to face with a species she'd been conditioned to fear and distrust. Marek's head throbbed as she pieced together the events that led to this moment. Her research vessel, carrying invaluable data on a potential cure for a deadly virus affecting both humans and Remans, had been ambushed by pirates in neutral space. She'd barely managed to eject in an escape pod before her ship was destroyed. The crash landing had left her battered and unconscious. By all rights, she should have perished on that barren rock. Instead, she was alive, her wounds treated, rehydrated, and under the wary gaze of a human. "I'm Raymond Campbell," the human introduced himself, his voice gruff but not unkind. "Found your distress signal while salvaging in the area. Couldn't just leave you out there to die, even if you are Raymond." Marek struggled to reconcile this act of compassion with everything she'd been taught about humans. The ongoing Cold War between their species had painted a picture of ruthless adversaries, not potential saviors. "Why?" she croaked, her throat still dry despite Raymond's efforts. Raymond shrugged. "Just because our governments are at each other's throats doesn't mean we all have to be monsters." He paused, then added, "I'm a freelance salvager. I avoid both human and Raymond territories. Less complications that way." As Marek's faculties returned, panic set in. "My research," she gasped. "It's still in the pod. We have to go back." Raymond's expression tightened. "That's not a good idea. Those weren't ordinary pirates that attacked you. They're still out there, looking for something valuable. Your research, I'm guessing." Marek nodded grimly. "It's a potential cure for the Nexus virus. If it falls into the wrong hands..." Understanding dawned on Raymond's face. He knew of the Nexus virus, a deadly pathogen that had been ravaging both human and Reman populations. A cure could end the suffering of millions, or be weaponized to devastating effect. "We'll get it," Raymond decided, his jaw set with determination. "But we'll need to be quick and quiet." They returned to the crash site, Raymond's small craft setting down near the mangled escape pod. Marek led him to a hidden compartment, extracting a reinforced data core. Relief washed over her as she confirmed its integrity. Their victory was short-lived. The roar of engines announced the arrival of a larger ship. The pirates had returned, no doubt drawn by Raymond's vessel. "Run!" Raymond shouted, pushing Marek towards his ship. They sprinted across the lunar surface, reduced gravity lending speed to their desperate flight. Plasma bolts sizzled past them, kicking up plumes of moon dust. They barely made it into Raymond's ship before the pirates opened fire in earnest. Raymond's hands flew over the controls, and the small craft lurched into the air. They weaved through a barrage of weapons fire, Raymond's piloting skills put to the ultimate test. As they broke atmosphere and rocketed into space, Marek clutched the precious data core to her chest. She'd started this journey alone, hunted, with little hope of completing her mission. Now, against all odds, she had an ally. A human, of all things. Raymond plotted a course away from the moon, mindful of the need to avoid both human and Raymond patrols. "So," he said, breaking the tense silence, "where to? You mentioned a neutral research facility?" Marek nodded, her mind racing with the implications of their unlikely alliance. "Yes, but getting there won't be easy. The pirates will be hunting us, and if either of our governments catch wind of this..." Raymond's lips quirked in a grim smile. "Well then, looks like we're in for one hell of a ride, doesn't it?" As the stars streaked by outside, Marek found herself reevaluating everything she thought she knew about humans. Perhaps there was hope for both their species after all. The stellar scavenger glided through the inky void of neutral space, its hull still bearing scorch marks from their narrow escape. Inside the cramped cockpit, Raymond's eyes flicked between the navigation display and the rear sensors, ever vigilant for signs of pursuit. Beside him, Marek hunched over a makeshift workstation, her fingers dancing across the holographic interfaces as she worked to stabilize the precious research data. "How's it looking?" Raymond asked, breaking the tense silence that had settled between them. Marek's brow furrowed. "The core's integrity is holding, but I need more specialized equipment to ensure long-term viability. This jury-rigged setup won't suffice for much longer. Raymond nodded, his expression grim. We've got another problem. That last firefight did more damage than I thought. We're losing fuel, and some of our critical systems are starting to fail. We need to make repairs, and soon. A proximity alert chimed, drawing their attention to the nav screen. A small station appeared, a glowing point of light amidst the star-speckled darkness. Nexus Station, Raymond mused. It's risky, but they're known for their neutrality. We might be able to get what we need without raising too many eyebrows. Merrick hesitated, weighing their options. Do we have a choice? Not if we want to keep breathing, Raymond replied, already adjusting their course. The stellar scavenger docked with a hiss of hydraulics, latching onto one of Nexus Station's numerous berths. As the airlock cycled, Raymond turned to Merrick. We'll cover more ground if we split up. I'll handle the ship repairs and supplies. You focus on finding what you need for the data core. Keep your comm open and stay alert. We're not out of the woods yet. Merrick nodded, her hand instinctively tightening around the data core tucked securely in her pack. As the airlock hissed open, they stepped into the controlled chaos of Nexus Station. The trading hub was a riot of sights, sounds, and smells. Aliens of countless species haggled in a cacophony of languages, while automated cargo drones zipped overhead. Merrick's senses reeled, overwhelmed by the diversity she'd never encountered in Raymond's space. Raymond squeezed her shoulder reassuringly. Remember, act like you belong here. No one will look twice if you don't give them a reason to. With a final nod, he disappeared into the crowd, leaving Merrick to navigate the station alone. She made her way through the winding corridors, following the station's holographic guides to the research and technology sector. Her heart raced as she approached a vendor specializing in data storage and analysis equipment. The Andorian proprietor eyed her warily as she examined the wares. I need a quantum-stabilized data enclosure, Merrick said, trying to keep her voice steady, compatible with Riemann tech. The Andorian's antennae twitched. Rare request, not cheap. As the vendor quoted a price, Merrick's stomach sank. The cost was far beyond what little funds she and Raymond had scraped together. She was about to walk away when a smooth voice interjected. Perhaps I could be of assistance? Marek turned to find herself face to face with a Zarkonian, his scaled skin shimmering under the station's lights. He smiled, revealing rows of sharp teeth. Vex, he introduced himself with a slight bow. Information broker. I couldn't help but overhear your predicament. Marek's instincts screamed danger, but she forced herself to remain calm. I'm not sure how you could help, she said cautiously. Vex's eyes glinted. Information is the most valuable currency, my dear. I'd be willing to purchase some of your non-essential data in exchange for the equipment you need. Marek's mind raced. The offer was tempting, but the risks were enormous. Before she could respond, Vex leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. I know you're carrying something far more valuable than you let on. My associates and I would be very interested in acquiring it. Alarm bells rang in Marek's head. She took a step back, her hand moving protectively over her pack. I'm not interested in any deals, she said firmly. Vex's demeanor shifted instantly, his friendly facade melting away to reveal cold calculation. With a subtle gesture, two burly aliens materialized from the crowd, blocking Marek's escape routes. I'm afraid I must insist, Vex hissed. Marek's heart pounded as she looked for a way out. Just as Vex's associates moved to grab her, a familiar voice cut through the tension. There you are, honey. I've been looking all over for you. Raymond appeared as if from nowhere, smoothly inserting himself between Marek and her would-be attackers. His posture was relaxed, but Marek could see the coiled tension in his muscles. Vex's eyes narrowed. This doesn't concern you, human? Walk away. Raymond's smile never faltered, but his voice carried an edge of steel. I'm afraid it does concern me. You see, this lovely lady is my wife, and we're late for an appointment. So if you'll excuse us... Before Vex could respond, Raymond's fist shot out with lightning speed, catching the Zarkonian squarely in the jaw. In the same fluid motion, he spun, delivering a devastating kick to one of the alien enforcers. Marek stood frozen for a split second, shocked by the sudden violence and Raymond's unexpected combat prowess. The human's shout snapped her back to reality. "Run!" They bolted through the station, ducking and weaving through the startled crowd. Alarms began to blare, and the station's security forces mobilized, adding to the chaos. "What happened with the repairs?" Marek gasped as they ran. "Got what we needed," Raymond panted, "but we've outstayed our welcome. We need to go now." They skidded around a corner, the stellar scavenger's berth coming into view. Raymond's fingers flew over the access panel, and the ship's airlock slid open. They dove inside just as plasma bolts sizzled past, scorching the hull. Raymond threw himself into the pilot's seat, his hands a blur over the controls. The ship's engines roared to life as warning klaxons echoed through the station. "Unauthorized departure in progress. Security lockdown initiated." The massive docking bay doors began to grind closed. Raymond gritted his teeth, pushing the stellar scavenger to its limits. They shot forward, scraping through the narrowing gap with barely inches to spare. As the station receded behind them, Marek slumped in her seat, adrenaline still coursing through her veins. "That was too close," she breathed. Raymond nodded grimly. "And it's about to get closer. Look." The sensor display lit up with multiple contacts, ships launching from Nexus station in pursuit. "We need to have a talk about your research," Raymond said, his eyes fixed on the controls as he pushed the ship into evasive maneuvers. "I overheard some interesting chatter while I was gathering supplies. There's a lot more going on here than simple piracy." Marek clutched the data core, her mind blown from the implications. As Raymond began to fill her in on what he'd learned, a sudden tremor ran through the ship. Warning lights flashed across the console. "What now?" Marek asked, dread creeping into her voice. Raymond's face was grim as he scanned the readouts. "Remember that damage I mentioned? It's worse than I thought. We're losing power to critical systems, including life support." Marek's eyes widened in alarm. "How long do we have?" "Not long enough to reach safe harbor," Raymond replied, his fingers flying over the navigation controls. "We need to find somewhere to set down for repairs, and fast." As they scanned nearby systems for a suitable landing site, Marek realized that their fates were now irrevocably intertwined. Human and Raymond, thrown together by circumstance, now united in a desperate bid for survival. The true scope of their mission was only beginning to unfold, and the challenges ahead loomed larger than ever. Ever before. As Raymond guided the stellar scavenger through the inky void of space, alarms blared across the cockpit. The ship shuddered, straining against the damage it had sustained. "We're losing power fast," Raymond announced, his eyes darting between readouts. "Life support is failing. We need to find somewhere to land, now." Marek leaned forward, scanning the navigation display. "There," she said, pointing to a small planetoid on the edge of the system. "It's within range, and the atmosphere reads as marginally breathable." Raymond nodded, adjusting their course. "It'll have to do. Hold on tight, this landing's going to be rough." The stellar scavenger plummeted through the thin atmosphere, its hull glowing red-hot from the friction. Raymond fought the controls, wrestling the failing ship into a controlled descent. They skimmed over jagged mountain peaks, the ground rushing up to meet them at alarming speed. With a bone-jarring impact, the ship slammed into a rocky plateau. It skidded across the barren surface, leaving a trail of debris in its wake before finally grinding to a halt at the edge of a deep canyon. For a long moment, silence reigned. Then, with a groan of stressed metal, the ship's hatch cracked open. Raymond and Marek stumbled out, coughing in the thin, acrid air. "We made it!" Marek gasped, her eyes wide as she took in the alien landscape. Towering mountains of bare rock stretched as far as the eye could see, their peaks lost in swirling, ruddy clouds. Raymond nodded grimly. "Barely. Come on, we need to salvage what we can from the ship. No telling how long we'll be stuck here." They worked quickly, retrieving emergency supplies, tools, and the precious data core. As the binary suns of this alien world began to set, casting long shadows across the desolate terrain, they established a makeshift camp near the crippled stellar scavenger. Raymond spent the next day assessing the damage to the ship, His expression grew increasingly grim as he worked his way through the systems. "How bad is it?" Merrick asked, returning from her own survey of the immediate area. Raymond wiped grease-stained hands on his jumpsuit. "Bad. The main power coupling is fused beyond repair. The grav drive motivator is shot. And don't even get me started on the state of the life support systems." Merrick's shoulders slumped. "Can you fix it?" "With the right parts, maybe. But we don't have them. And without a major shipyard—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "So we're stranded," Merrick said, her voice flat. Raymond's fist tight. "No, we're challenged. There's a difference. We'll find a way off this rock, even if I have to rebuild this ship from the ground up. It'll just take time." Days stretched into weeks as they worked tirelessly on the stellar scavenger. Merrick applied her scientific knowledge to help Raymond improvise solutions, but progress was frustratingly slow. They rationed their supplies carefully, knowing they were in for a long haul. It was during one of their increasingly long repair sessions that Merrick noticed something odd on her scanner. "Raymond," she called, frowning at the readout. "Are you seeing this?" He moved to her side, peering at the display. "An energy signature? Out here?" They exchanged a look of cautious hope. Perhaps they weren't as alone on this desolate world as they'd thought. Tracking the signal led them to the mouth of a vast canyon. As they picked their way down the treacherous slope, Raymond suddenly froze. "Look there," he whispered, pointing to a weathered structure jutting from the canyon wall. Hidden by eons of erosion and geological shifts, the remains of an alien outpost clung to the rocky face. Its architecture was unlike anything either of them had ever seen, all sweeping curves and seamless integration with the natural stone. "Incredible," Merrick breathed as they approached the entrance. "Who could have built this? And how long ago?" Raymond ran his hand over the smooth surface of a wall. "No idea, but some systems are still active, judging by that energy signature. Maybe we'll find something useful inside." They ventured deeper into the facility, their footsteps echoing in corridors untouched for millennia. Strange symbols adorned the walls, pulsing faintly with an inner light. They passed room after room filled with unfamiliar technology, much of it still humming with latent power. In a vast chamber at the heart of the outpost, they found their prize. A sleek, cylindrical device dominated the center of the room, holographic interfaces flickering to life as they approached. "It's some kind of fabricator," Merrick said, her eyes wide with excitement as she examined the alien controls. "If I'm reading this correctly, it can create complex components from raw materials." Raymond let out a low whistle. "That could be our ticket out of here. If we can figure out how to use it, we might be able to fabricate the parts we need for the ship." They set to work immediately, Merrick deciphering the alien language while Raymond gathered what raw materials he could find. It was painstaking, trial and error work, but gradually they began to unlock the secrets of the ancient device. What they didn't realize was that their actions had consequences. Deep in the outpost systems, their activity triggered long dormant protocols. A distress beacon, silent for eons, sputtered to life. Light years away, a Riemann patrol ship picked up the faint signal. The ship's captain, intrigued by the anomalous reading from an unexplored sector, altered course to investigate. Back on the planet, Raymond and Merrick worked with renewed vigor. The fabricator, once they learned its intricacies, proved to be a miraculous tool. Components that would have taken months to jury-rig could now be produced in hours. As they toiled, they found themselves growing closer. The barriers of species and culture began to erode, replaced by mutual respect and understanding. Merrick found herself admiring Raymond's resourcefulness and commitment, qualities she'd never associated with humans before. One evening, as they rested from their labors, Merrick broached a subject that had been weighing on her mind. "Raymond," she began hesitantly, "I've been thinking about my research." He looked up, sensing the seriousness in her tone. "What about it?" "I've found data in the Outpost archives that could be relevant to my work. It might make the virus cure more effective, more universal." She paused, conflict evident in her eyes. "But if I incorporate it, the cure wouldn't just be for Riemanns anymore. It could work for humans too." Raymond was silent for a long moment, understanding the implications. "That's a big decision," he said finally. "What are you thinking?" Merrick sighed, her gaze distant. I don't know. A month ago, I wouldn't have hesitated. My duty was clear. But now, she looked at Raymond, really looked at him. Now I'm not so sure. Before Raymond could respond, an alarm blared from the equipment they'd salvaged from the ship. They rushed to check the readout, their hearts sinking at what they saw. A Riemann patrol ship, Merrick whispered, her face pale. They must have detected the outpost signal. Raymond's mind raced. We're not ready to launch yet. If they find us here... They'll take me back, Merrick finished, and you'll be arrested or worse. They looked at each other, the weight of their situation hanging heavy between them. Everything they'd worked for, everything they'd discovered, hung in the balance. We need a plan, Raymond said, his voice steady despite the fear churning in his gut. And we need it fast. As the Riemann ship entered orbit, Raymond and Merrick knew their time had run out. They had to act now, or lose everything they'd fought so hard to achieve. Raymond's fingers flew across the control panel, inputting the coordinates Dr. Elena Frost had provided. The stellar scavenger lurched forward, its engines straining as they pushed deeper into uncharted space. Marek leaned over his shoulder, her eyes fixed on the navigation display. Are you sure about this? She asked, her voice tight with tension. Raymond nodded, not taking his eyes off the controls. It's our only option. Dr. Frost's facility is our best chance at completing your research and staying off the radar. As they approached the designated coordinates, the ship's sensors began to pick up unusual readings. A massive asteroid loomed before them, its surface pockmarked and unremarkable. But something was off about it. There's nothing here, Merrick said, frowning at the readouts. Raymond's lips curled into a small smile. That's what we're supposed to think. He reached for a secondary control panel, inputting a complex series of codes. Watch this. The space around the asteroid seemed to shimmer and distort. Suddenly, a hidden hangar materialized before their eyes, seamlessly integrated into the rock face. Incredible, Merrick breathed. Her scientific curiosity piqued despite their dire circumstances. Raymond guided the stellar scavenger through the opening, setting it down gently in the cavernous docking bay. As the engines powered down, they saw a lone figure approaching their ship. Dr. Elena Frost cut an imposing figure as she strode towards them. Her silver hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her piercing blue eyes scrutinized them as they disembarked. Raymond, she said, her voice clipped and professional. I see you've brought company. Her gaze lingered on Marique, a hint of suspicion in her eyes. Raymond stepped forward, positioning himself slightly in front of Merrick. Dr. Frost, this is Merrick. She's the reason we're here. Her research could end this war, but we need your help to complete it. Dr. Frost's eyebrows rose fractionally. She studied Merrick for a long moment before nodding curtly. Very well. Follow me. They trailed after Dr. Frost through a series of winding corridors, each more secure than the last. Finally, they emerged into a state-of-the-art laboratory that took Merrick's breath away. This is where you'll work, Dr. Frost announced, gesturing to the array of advanced equipment. I trust you'll find everything you need here. Marek nodded, already moving towards the nearest workstation. Her fingers danced across the controls, familiarizing herself with the setup. Over the next few days, a rhythm developed. Marek worked tirelessly on her virus cure, often collaborating with Dr. Frost. The human scientist's expertise proved invaluable, helping Marek refine her formulas and run more comprehensive simulations. Raymond, for his part, kept himself busy by assisting where he could and maintaining security protocols. He found himself watching Marek more and more, admiring her dedication and brilliant mind. During their rare moments of downtime, Raymond and Marek gravitated towards the facility's observation deck. They stood side by side, gazing out at the star-studded expanse of space. Do you think it's really possible? Marek asked one evening, her voice soft. Peace between humans and remnants? Raymond turned to look at her, taking in her profile silhouetted against the starry backdrop. I have to believe it is, he replied. Otherwise, what are we fighting for? Marek met his gaze, a small smile playing on her lips. When did you become such an optimist? Before Raymond could respond, Alarms began blaring throughout the facility. They rushed to the control room where Dr. Frost was already pulling up sensor data. "We've got incoming," she announced grimly. "Multiple ships, both human and Raman. Someone's leaked our location." Raymond's mind raced. "How long do we have?" "Not long," Dr. Frost replied. "We need to move now." They sprang into action. Marek and Dr. Frost hurriedly gathered their research data, transferring it to a secure portable drive. Raymond helped where he could, all while keeping an eye on the approaching ships. As the enemy fleet drew nearer, Dr. Frost led them to a hidden hangar bay. A sleek escape shuttle waited inside, its lines speaking of speed and stealth. "This shuttle can carry 2, Dr. Frost explained, already initiating the launch sequence. "You need to go now." Marek's eyes widened. "But what about you?" Dr. Frost's expression hardened. "I'm staying behind. I'll erase all traces of our work and do what I can to slow them down. It's the only way to give you a fighting chance." Raymond started to protest, but the look in Dr. Frost's eyes stopped him cold. He recognized the commitment of someone who had made up their mind. With heavy hearts, Raymond and Marek boarded the shuttle. As the hangar doors opened, they caught one last glimpse of Dr. Frost at the controls, her face set in unyielding commitment. The shuttle shot out of the asteroid just as the first enemy ships arrived. Raymond's hands flew over the controls, activating the advanced stealth systems. They watched in tense silence as the human and Raymond vessels converged on Dr. Frost's facility, their weapons blazing. "We made it," Marek whispered as they slipped away undetected. Raymond nodded, but his expression remained grave. "For now, but we're not out of this yet." As the adrenaline of their escape faded, the reality of their situation set in. They were alone in an unfamiliar sector of space, with limited resources and nowhere to turn for help. Marek threw herself into her work, using the shuttle's small but efficient lab to continue her research. Raymond focused on keeping them hidden, using every trick he'd learned in his years as a pilot to evade detection. Days passed in a blur of work and constant vigilance. Their supplies began to dwindle, and the shuttle's power cells showed signs of depletion. They knew they couldn't keep running forever. "We need to make a decision," Raymond said one day, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "We can try to find a neutral outpost, maybe trade for supplies, or we keep pushing on, hoping to find somewhere truly safe." Marek looked up from her work, dark circles under her eyes. Both options carry significant risks. Before they could discuss further, a light began blinking on the shuttle's communication panel. Raymond frowned, leaning in to examine it. "It's a distress signal," he said, surprise evident in his voice. "And it's using an old human military frequency, one I recognize from my past." Marek moved to join him, peering at the readout. "Could it be a trap?" Raymond shook his head slowly. "I don't think so. This code, it's not something that would be easily faked." They looked at each other, weighing their options. After everything they'd been through, after all they'd sacrificed, this mysterious signal represented both hope and danger. "What do you think?" Marek asked, her eyes searching Raymond's face. Raymond took a deep breath, his hand hovering over the controls. "I think it's time we took a chance." With a decisive motion, he altered their course, setting the shuttle on a path towards the source of the signal. As they accelerated towards the unknown, Raymond and Marek shared a look of commitment tinged with uncertainty. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. Raymond guided the shuttle towards the source of the distress signal, his hands steady on the controls despite the tension coursing through his body. Marek leaned forward, her eyes fixed on the interface as a small, uncharted planet came into view. "I'm picking up signs of an old human colony," she said, her voice tinged with surprise. "But it looks like it's been abandoned for years." As they entered the planet's atmosphere, Raymond scanned for a suitable landing site. The terrain below was a riot of lush vegetation, with glimpses of crumbling structures peeking through the greenery. He set the shuttle down in a clearing near a dilapidated facility that seemed to be the source of the signal. Stepping out of the shuttle, Raymond and Marek were hit by a wave of humid air. The jungle around them buzzed with alien life, a cacophony of unfamiliar sounds filling the air. They approached the facility cautiously, weapons at the ready. The entrance was partially obscured by vines, which Raymond carefully pushed aside. As they stepped into the dimly lit interior, the musty smell of abandonment filled their nostrils. Dust motes danced in the beams of their flashlights as they made their way deeper into the structure. A sudden noise from ahead made them freeze. Raymond raised his weapon, but lowered it quickly as an elderly human man stepped into view, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "I never thought I'd see another living soul," the man said, his voice rough from disuse. "I'm Dr. Marcus Chen. Welcome to what's left of Outpost Omega." Over the next few hours, Dr. Chen shared his story. He was the last survivor of a secret research team sent to develop advanced terraforming technology. When the human-Riemann conflict escalated, their supply lines were cut off, leaving them stranded and forgotten. As Merrick explained their situation and her research, Dr. Chen's eyes lit up with interest. "Your virus cure, it's fascinating, and I think our terraforming work might be able to help." They moved to Dr. Chen's lab, where decades-old equipment hummed alongside makeshift devices cobbled together from spare parts. Merrick and Dr. Chen dove into their work, their excited chatter filling the air as they compared notes and theories. Raymond, feeling out of his depth in the scientific discussion, decided to make himself useful elsewhere. "I'm going to scout the perimeter," he announced. "See what we're dealing with out there." As he explored the overgrown colony, Raymond's military instincts kicked in. He noted defensive positions, potential escape routes, and areas that might conceal hidden dangers. His unease grew as he approached the old communication array on the outskirts of the settlement. Something about the array didn't look right. Pushing aside a curtain of vines, Raymond discovered a sleek, modern transmitter nestled among the outdated equipment. Its lights blinked steadily, sending data bursts to an unknown recipient. "We've got a problem," Raymond announced as he burst back into the lab. He quickly explained his discovery to Merrick and Dr. Chen. Merrick's face paled. "If someone knows we're here..." "Then we need to be ready," Raymond finished. He turned to Dr. Chen. "Does this place have any defense systems?" The old scientist nodded slowly. "There are some old turrets and shield generators. They haven't been used in years, but if we can get them online..." Raymond didn't wait for him to finish. "Show me." For the next several days, they worked tirelessly. Merrick and Dr. Chen made rapid progress on the cure, their combined knowledge yielding breakthroughs that had seemed impossible before. Meanwhile, Raymond threw himself into fortifying their position, reactivating old systems, and setting up a network of alarms and traps. Their fears were realized on the 5th day. Raymond was calibrating a sensor array when alarms blared throughout the facility. He rushed to the control room where Merrick and Dr. Chen were already gathered around a display screen. "Multiple ships entering the atmosphere," Merrick reported, her voice tight. "Human military, Riemann warships, and..." "Raymond, I think it's the pirate group that attacked my ship." Raymond's mind raced as he assessed their options. "How close are you to finishing the cure?" Merrick and Dr. Chen shared a look. "We've had a breakthrough," Merrick said. "By integrating Dr. Chen's terraforming principles, we've developed a version that can be dispersed through a planet's atmosphere. It could potentially cure both humans and Riemanns simultaneously." "But we haven't tested it yet," Dr. Chen added. "It's risky." Raymond's eyes fell on the schematic of an old terraforming device. An idea began to form. "What if we use that to disperse the cure? It's our best shot at proving it works before those ships land." They sprang into action, modifying the terraforming equipment as quickly as they could. Outside, the sound of distant engines grew louder as ships began to land. Raymond's muscles tensed as he worked, acutely aware of how little time they had left. Just as they finished the modifications, the facility shook with a nearby explosion. "They're here," Raymond said grimly. He turned to Merrick and Dr. Chen. "Get that cure loaded. I'll buy us some time." Raymond raced through the facility, activating the defense systems he'd prepared. Turrets sprang to life, firing at advancing troops. Shield generators hummed, deflecting incoming fire. But he knew it wouldn't hold them off for long. He made it back to the terraforming chamber just as Merrick finished loading the cure. "It's ready," she said, her eyes meeting his with a mix of fear and dedication. Raymond nodded and moved to the control panel. His hand hovered over the activation switch as the sounds of battle grew closer. With a deep breath, he pressed the button. The facility rumbled as the massive terraforming device roared to life. Outside, a plume of shimmering particles burst into the sky, quickly spreading across the planet's atmosphere. The effect was almost immediate. The infected plant life around the facility began to visibly recover, leaves unfurling and colors brightening. The sounds of conflict outside ceased, replaced by a stunned silence. Raymond, Merrick, and Dr. Chen stepped out of the facility to find themselves surrounded by a mix of human soldiers, Raymond warriors, and rough-looking pirates. All eyes were on the miraculous transformation taking place around them. A human officer stepped forward, his weapon lowered but still at the ready. "What have you done?" he demanded. Merrick moved to stand beside Raymond, her head held high. "We've found a cure," she said. "One that works for both humans and Raymonds." A Raymond commander pushed through the crowd, his eyes narrow with suspicion. "Prove it," he growled. As the group of faction leaders closed in around them, Raymond felt the weight of the moment. Everything they had worked for, everything they had sacrificed, had led to this. He took a small step forward, positioning himself protectively in front of Merrick and Dr. Chen. "We can prove it," Raymond said, his voice steady despite the tension thrumming through his body. "But first, we need to talk." "We can prove it," Raymond said, his voice steady despite the tension thrumming through his body. "But first, we need to establish a temporary truce. This cure affects all of us, and we should approach this rationally." The human officer and Raymond commander exchanged wary glances. The pirate leader, a scarred woman with a shock of white hair, stepped forward. "He's right," she said, her voice gravelly. "I'm Captain Zara, and I say we hear them out." The factions lowered their weapons, creating an uneasy circle around Raymond, Merrick, and Dr. Chen. Merrick took a deep breath and began explaining the cure's development, her words clipped and precise. "We need volunteers," she concluded, "one from each species to demonstrate the cure's effectiveness." After a tense moment, 3 individuals stepped forward. A human soldier with a visible infection on his arm, a Raymond warrior whose scales had dulled from the virus, and a pirate with telltale signs of the disease. Dr. Chen quickly set up a makeshift testing area, his gnarled hands moving with surprising dexterity. Merrick administered the cure to each volunteer, her movements calm and assured, despite the dozens of eyes watching her every move. Minutes ticked by in tense silence. Then before their eyes, the human's infected skin began to clear. The Raymond scales regained their luster. The pirate's symptoms visibly receded. A murmur of amazement rippled through the crowd. The faction leaders leaned in, their expressions a mix of disbelief and hope. Suddenly, alarms blared from the facility. Raymond rushed to the sensor array, his heart pounding. On the screen, a massive ship entered the planet's orbit. "It's a Raymond warship," he announced, turning to face the group. "Bigger than anything I've ever seen." Merrick's face paled. "That's my father's ship," she whispered. "High Admiral Vox." The Raymond commander barked orders into his communicator. Moments later, a holographic projection flickered to life in the center of the group. High Admiral Vox's stern face loomed over them, his eyes locking onto Merrick. "Daughter," he said, his voice cold, "you will return to me immediately, and you will surrender all research data on this alleged cure." Raymond moved instinctively, placing himself between Merrick and the Raymond soldiers who had started to advance. "She's not going anywhere," he said, his hand resting on his weapon. The air crackled with tension. Weapons were raised once more, each faction eyeing the others suspiciously. "Wait!" Captain Zara's voice cut through the chaos. She stepped into the center of the group, her eyes darting between the faction leaders. "We're missing an opportunity here. This cure is too important for any one group to control." She turned to face High Admiral Vox's projection. "I propose a neutral third party oversee the distribution of the cure. Equal access for all." The human officer nodded slowly. It could work, prevent any one faction from gaining an advantage. High Admiral Vox's hologram flickered as he considered the proposal. "And who would you suggest as this neutral party, pirate?" "A joint task force," Zara replied. "Representatives from each group working together to ensure fair distribution." As the faction leaders debated the proposal, Raymond pulled Marek and Dr. Chen aside. "We need to prepare multiple samples," he whispered, "and compile all the data. If this works, we can't risk losing anything." They worked quickly, Marek and Dr. Chen synthesizing additional doses of the cure, while Raymond copied research data onto secure drives. The sounds of negotiation continued in the background, punctuated by occasional outbursts. Finally, a consensus was reached. The factions agreed to form a joint task force, with representatives from each group chosen to oversee the cure's distribution. To Raymond's surprise, both he and Marek were selected as part of this initiative. As they prepared to move the samples and data, a commotion erupted at the edge of the clearing. A group of human and Riemann soldiers, their faces twisted with anger, charged towards the facility. "Traitors!" one of them shouted. "We won't let you give away our advantage." Raymond's military training kicked in. He quickly assessed the colony's defenses, barking orders to those around him. "Activate the shield generators! Man the turrets!" The disparate group, only moments ago at each other's throats, now found themselves fighting side by side against a common enemy. Raymond coordinated their efforts, using the reactivated defense systems to repel the attackers. In the midst of the chaos, Marek surprised everyone. She moved with fluid grace, disarming attackers with swift, precise movements. Raymond watched in awe as she took down a Riemann soldier twice her size. "Special operative training," she explained breathlessly when she caught his look. "My father insisted." The attack was short-lived but intense. As the dust settled, the enormity of their task became clear. Transporting the cure off-planet would be fraught with danger, with extremists from all sides seeking to disrupt their mission. As they began preparations for departure, High Admiral Vox's hologram reappeared. "Marek," he said, his voice softer than before, "I request a private audience. Bring your companion, if you must." His eyes flicked to Raymond. Marek nodded, her face a mask of composure. She and Raymond followed a Riemann soldier to a secure communication room. The full-size hologram of High Admiral Vox materialized before them, his imposing figure filling the small space. "Father," Marek said, her voice steady. What followed was a tense conversation. Years of unspoken words and conflicting ideologies laid bare. Raymond stood silently by Marek's side, offering silent support as she faced her father. To everyone's surprise, High Admiral Vox's demeanor softened. He looked at Raymond, then back to his daughter. "You've chosen your path well, Marek," he said finally. "And perhaps it's time I reconsider mine." He straightened, addressing them both. "I offer my flagship as a neutral vessel for your mission. It will transport your task force and the cure to a secure facility for mass production and distribution." Raymond and Marek shared a look of disbelief. This unexpected turn could be the key to their success, or a clever trap. As they left the communication room, they found the assembled group waiting anxiously. Raymond took a deep breath, knowing that their next words could shape the future of multiple species. "We have a ship," he announced. "Now we need to decide who goes and how we safeguard the cure during transport." The factions began to debate once more, but this time with a sense of shared purpose. As Raymond looked around at the unlikely allies they'd made, he couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. The journey ahead would be dangerous, but for the first time, it seemed possible that they might actually succeed. Preparations for departure began immediately, with Raymond overseeing the loading of equipment and supplies onto High Admiral Vox's massive warship. As they boarded the vessel, Raymond couldn't help but marvel at its sheer size and technological sophistication. The Raymond engineering was far beyond anything he had encountered in his military career. Sleek corridors lined with pulsing bioluminescent panels led them to their assigned quarters. Marek and Dr. Chen wasted no time setting up a makeshift laboratory in one of the cargo bays. Raymond assisted them in securing delicate equipment and arranging workstations. The air hummed with nervous energy as the diverse group of humans, Riemanns, and pirates worked side by side, their previous animosities set aside in the face of their shared mission. "We should be able to continue refining the cure during transit," Marek said, her eyes bright with perseverance as she calibrated a complex-looking device. "Every improvement we make could save countless lives." Raymond nodded, his hand briefly touching her shoulder. Just don't forget to rest. We've got a long journey ahead. As the ship prepared for departure, Raymond made his way to the bridge. He wanted to familiarize himself with the ship's systems, knowing that his expertise might prove useful. The Raymond crew eyed him warily, but didn't object to his presence. The ship shuddered as it lifted off, the view outside the reinforced windows shifting from the planet's surface to the star-studded expanse of space. Raymond watched in awe as they accelerated, the planet rapidly shrinking behind them. Their sense of accomplishment was short-lived. Barely 2 days into their journey, alarms blared throughout the ship. Raymond raced to the nearest status panel, his heart pounding. The readout showed critical failures in multiple life support systems. "What's happening?" he shouted to a nearby Raymond technician. The technician's scales rippled with agitation. "Unknown malfunction. Several decks are losing atmosphere and temperature control." Raymond's mind raced. "We need to reroute power and seal off the affected areas. Show me your system schematic." For a moment, the technician hesitated, centuries of distrust evident in his eyes. Then, seeing the urgency of the situation, he pulled up the ship's layout on a nearby console. Raymond's fingers flew over the controls, his years of experience with human vessels allowing him to quickly grasp the Raymond technology. He identified the malfunctioning systems and began implementing emergency protocols. "Here," he pointed to a section of the ship, "we can divert power from the auxiliary generators to stabilize the atmospheric processors, but we'll need to manually activate the backup systems on Deck 7. The technician nodded, impressed despite himself. "I'll send a team." Over the next few hours, Raymond worked alongside the Raymond crew, his calm demeanor and quick thinking proving invaluable. They managed to stabilize most of the affected areas, but several sections of the ship remained uninhabitable. As they worked to repair the damage, the ship entered a dense asteroid field. The navigation team skillfully maneuvered through the floating debris, but the added strain on the engines only exacerbated their problems. Raymond was elbow-deep in a malfunctioning control panel when a new alarm sounded. He rushed to the bridge, arriving just as High Admiral Vox received a report from his tactical officer. "Multiple unidentified vessels detected," the officer announced, his voice tense. "They're in pursuit and closing fast." Vox's eyes narrowed. "Composition?" "Mixed, human and Raymond signatures. Smaller craft, but heavily armed." Raymond's stomach dropped. "Extremists," he said, meeting Vox's gaze. "They must have followed us." Vox nodded grimly. "Evasive maneuvers. Prepare defensive systems." The massive warship banked sharply, weaving through the asteroid field with surprising agility for its size. Raymond gripped a nearby console as the inertial dampeners struggled to compensate. "Incoming fire!" the tactical officer shouted. The ship shuddered as energy blasts impacted their shields. Raymond watched in awe as Vox calmly directed his crew, showcasing the full capabilities of the Raymond vessel. They returned fire, their superior weaponry easily outmatching the smaller ships. But their pursuers were relentless. As they evaded and counterattacked, the warship took several hits from both weapons, fire, and asteroid collisions. Damage reports flooded in from multiple decks. "They're attempting to board," a security officer announced. Raymond turned to Vox. "I can help coordinate your security teams. I know how these extremists think." Vox studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Go, protect the cure at all costs." Raymond raced through the ship, linking up with Raymond security teams. He quickly assessed their defensive capabilities and began formulating strategies. His tactical acumen, honed through years of military service, meshed well with the Raymond's natural combat instincts. They repelled several boarding attempts, Raymond fighting alongside the Raymond warriors. His skill in close-quarters combat impressed even the most skeptical of his alien allies. As the battle raged on, Raymond received an urgent message from Merrick. She had made a breakthrough in the lab, discovering a way to enhance the cure's potency using trace elements found in the asteroid field. Excitement coursed through him as he relayed the information to Vox. This development could drastically reduce the resources needed for mass production, making their mission even more critical. But their elation was short-lived. As Raymond made his way back to the lab to assist Marek, he noticed something odd. A member of their joint task force, a human scientist named Dr. Elias, was behaving suspiciously near the communication center. Raymond's instincts, honed by years of covert operations, kicked in. He quietly approached, using the chaos of the ongoing battle as cover. As he drew closer, he overheard Dr. Elias speaking in hushed tones. "Transmitting the data now. The enhanced formula will be yours soon." Raymond's blood ran cold. They had a spy in their midst, attempting to send Marek's breakthrough to the Extremists. He burst into action, tackling Dr. Elias just as the man reached for the transmission controls. They grappled fiercely, crashing into delicate equipment. Alarms blared as systems shorted out around them. Raymond managed to subdue Dr. Elias, but at a cost. The communication center was in shambles, critical equipment damaged beyond immediate repair. As security personnel took the spy into custody, Raymond assessed the damage. The ship's long-range communications were completely offline. They were cut off from outside contact, isolated in the vastness of space with enemies still in pursuit. He looked out the viewport at the ongoing battle, watching as ally ships finally arrived to assist them. But without the ability to coordinate, their advantage was limited. The Extremists pressed their attack, sensing the warship's vulnerability. Raymond knew what needed to be done. He gathered a team of human and Riemann engineers, explaining his plan to repair the communication array. It would require a dangerous spacewalk, with the battle still raging around them. As they donned their EVA suits, Raymond caught Marek's eye across the hangar. No words were needed. Her expression conveyed both concern and confidence. He nodded once, then stepped into the airlock. The void of space greeted them, beautiful and terrifying. Raymond led his team along the ship's hull, acutely aware of the weapons fire and debris zipping past them. They reached the damaged array, immediately setting to work. Raymond's hands moved swiftly, splicing wires and replacing fried components. He directed his team with quiet efficiency, each member working in perfect sync despite their different species. Suddenly, a massive impact rocked the ship. Raymond's magnetic boots kept him attached to the hull, but he watched in horror as one of his team members, a young Riemann engineer, was knocked free. Without hesitation, Raymond launched himself after her, using his suit's thrusters to close the distance. He caught her just as another explosion lit up the space around them. Using the last of his thruster fuel, he maneuvered them back to the ship. As they reattached to the hull, Raymond saw the source of the explosion. A critical hit had taken out the warship's main engines. They were dead in space with hostile forces closing in. He redoubled his efforts on the communication array, knowing it was their only hope. As he connected the final circuits, he allowed himself a moment of grim satisfaction. They had done it. "Communications restored," he reported, his voice hoarse. But their victory was short-lived. Without main engines, they were helpless against the approaching Extremist fleet. Raymond watched as High Admiral Vox made a difficult decision. "All hands prepare for emergency landing," Vox's voice boomed through the restored comm system. "We're going in." Raymond looked out at the nearby planet, its surface a swirling mass of corrosive gases and unstable tectonic activity. As they began their descent, he knew their troubles were not nearly finished. The real challenge was just beginning. The real challenge was just starting. As the ship plummeted through the planet's turbulent atmosphere, Raymond gripped the nearest safety harness, his mind racing. The corrosive gases outside ate away at the hull, creating an eerie symphony of creaks and groans. Through the viewport, he watched as the swirling, toxic landscape rushed up to meet them. "Brace for impact!" Vox's voice boomed over the intercom. The ship slammed into the planet's surface with bone-jarring force. Raymond's head snapped forward, then back, as the vessel skidded across the unstable terrain. When they finally ground to a halt, an eerie silence fell over the ship, broken only by the hiss of escaping air and the crackle of shorting electronics. Raymond shook off his daze and immediately sprang into action. "Everyone, sound off! Report injuries and status." As the crew began to respond, Raymond made his way through the ship, assessing the damage and helping where he could. The ship was a mess of twisted metal and sparking wires, but miraculously, most of the crew had survived. He found Merrick in the lab, already securing the precious cure samples. "We need to move," she said, her voice tense. "This ship won't protect us for long." Raymond nodded, quickly formulating a plan. "Gather a team. We need to reach higher ground and send a distress signal." Within minutes, Raymond had assembled a diverse group of humans and Raymonds. Each member was chosen for their specific skills: navigation, engineering, medical expertise. As they prepared to venture out onto the hostile planet's surface, Raymond addressed the team. "The journey ahead won't be easy," he said, his voice steady despite the gravity of their situation. "But together, we have a chance. Our mission remains the same: protect the cure, get off this planet, and save millions of lives." They donned protective suits and stepped out into a world that seemed designed to kill them. The air shimmered with heat, noxious fumes rising from cracks in the ground. In the distance, volcanoes belched ash and lava into the sky. Raymond took point, leading the team towards a cluster of rocky outcroppings that rose above the poisonous lowlands. Every step was a challenge, the ground shifting treacherously beneath their feet. As they picked their way across a field of steaming vents, a sudden tremor shook the earth. Raymond reacted instantly, grabbing the arm of a Riemann scientist who had lost his footing. Together they leapt clear as the ground gave way, revealing a chasm of bubbling, corrosive liquid. "Thank you," the Raymond said, his scales rippling with what Raymond recognized as gratitude. "We're in this together," Raymond replied, helping him up. The incident seemed to break down some of the remaining barriers between the humans and Riemanns. As they continued their arduous trek, Raymond noticed increased cooperation and communication between the species. They reached the base of the rocky outcroppings as the planet's strange, diffuse sunlight began to fade. Raymond called for a brief rest, knowing they couldn't risk stopping for long. As the team caught their breath, he conferred with the engineers. "How are we looking for the transmitter?" One of the human techs shook her head. "Not good. The atmospheric interference is stronger than we anticipated. We'll need to get to higher ground and boost the signal somehow." Raymond's mind raced, considering their options. What about the geothermal activity? Could we use that to our advantage? A Riemann engineer's eyes widened. Yes, we could use the heat differentials to amplify the signal, but it would be incredibly dangerous." "Danger's all we've got," Raymond said grimly. "Let's make it work." They resumed their climb, the terrain growing increasingly treacherous. Toxic gas vents erupted without warning, forcing the team to navigate carefully. At one point, a rock slide nearly swept away half the group. Raymond organized a human remand chain, and together they pulled their comrades to safety. As they neared the summit, the full scale of their challenge became apparent. The mountaintop was a seething cauldron of geothermal activity, with geysers of superheated steam and rivers of molten rock. "This is it," Raymond announced. "We set up here." The team worked feverishly to assemble the transmitter, using parts salvaged from their protective gear. The heat was intense, their suits barely able to cope with the extreme conditions. Just as they were about to activate the device, a critical component failed, warped by the intense heat. Raymond looked at the melted piece, then at his own suit's power regulator. Without hesitation, he removed the part from his suit. "Use this," he said, handing it to the engineer. "But sir," the engineer protested, "without this, your suit won't be able to protect you for long." Raymond met his gaze steadily. "Then we'd better work fast." As the team scrambled to integrate the new part, Raymond felt the protection of his suit begin to fail. The heat pressed in, becoming more intense by the second. Sweat poured down his face, and his lungs burned with each breath. Finally, the transmitter hummed to life. A powerful beam of energy shot into the sky, cutting through the planet's turbulent atmosphere. But the makeshift device was already starting to overheat. "It's not stable," the engineer shouted over the roar of nearby geysers. "Someone needs to manually maintain it, or it'll fail within minutes." Raymond didn't hesitate. "Everyone, fall back to a safe distance. I'll keep it running." Protests erupted from the team, but Raymond silenced them with a look. "That's an order. The mission comes first." As the others retreated, Raymond positioned himself next to the transmitter. The heat was nearly unbearable now, his skin blistering despite what remained of his suit's protection. He focused on the task at hand, making constant adjustments to keep the signal strong. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Raymond's vision blurred, his muscles screaming in protest. But he kept working, driven by the knowledge that millions of lives depended on their success. Just when he thought he couldn't endure another second, a new sound cut through the roar of the volcano. Raymond looked up to see the sleek shapes of rescue ships descending through the clouds. As consciousness began to slip away, Raymond allowed himself a small smile. They had done it. The cure was safe. Help had arrived. His last thought before the darkness took him was of Merrick. He hoped she was safe, that she had managed to protect the others at the crash site. As he collapsed, strong arms caught him, and he heard urgent voices calling his name. The rescue team worked quickly, stabilizing Raymond and gathering the rest of the group. As they lifted off from the hellish planet, leaving its corrosive atmosphere behind, the full magnitude of their accomplishment began to sink in. They had survived against impossible odds, protected the cure, and brought humans and Raymonds together in ways no one could have predicted. But as the medical team worked frantically to save Raymond's life, it was clear that their journey was just getting started. Raymond's world faded in and out of focus as the rescue team rushed him aboard their ship. The searing heat of the planet gave way to the cool, sterile air of the medical bay. He caught glimpses of worried faces, heard fragments of urgent conversations, but couldn't piece them together. Severe burns, organ damage, toxic exposure. He felt the ship's engines thrum to life, carrying them away from the hellish world that had nearly claimed his life. As darkness enveloped him once more, his last coherent thought was of Marek and the cure. Had they succeeded? Was it all worth it? When Raymond next opened his eyes, he found himself in a state-of-the-art medical facility. The room was awash in soft blue light, and he could hear the steady beep of monitors tracking his vital signs. He tried to move but found his body unresponsive, encased in some kind of regenerative field. A familiar voice cut through the haze of his senses. "Raymond, can you hear me?" He turned his head slightly, wincing at the effort, and saw Marek sitting beside his bed. Her scales were dull with exhaustion, but her eyes were bright with relief. "Marek," he croaked, his throat raw. "The cure?" She leaned forward, placing a gentle hand on the field surrounding him. "It's safe. We did it, Raymond. The distribution has already begun." He relaxed slightly, allowing himself to feel a flicker of triumph. But questions still burned in his mind. Where are we? How long? "We're on a neutral space station," Marek explained. "You've been unconscious for nearly a week. The doctors, they weren't sure you'd make it." Raymond absorbed this information, trying to reconcile the lost time. He noticed the dark circles under Marek's eyes, the way she seemed to sway slightly with fatigue. "Have you been here the whole time?" She nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Someone had to make sure you didn't do anything heroically stupid while unconscious." Before Raymond could respond, the door slid open and a human doctor entered, followed by a Riemann nurse. The sight of the two species working together sent a surge of hope through Raymond. "Ah, Commander Hawthorne," the doctor said, checking the monitors. "Good to see you've rejoined us. How are you feeling?" "Like I took a lava bath," Raymond replied dryly. The doctor chuckled. "Well, that's not far off. You suffered severe burns and toxic exposure. We've had you in an advanced regeneration field, rebuilding your damaged tissues. You'll need to stay in treatment for at least another week, but your prognosis is good." As the medical team conducted their examination, Raymond's mind raced with questions about the mission. When they finished, he turned to Marek. "What's happening with the cure distribution? Are we making progress?" Marek nodded, her expression serious. "High Admiral Vox is coordinating the efforts. Dr. Chen made a breakthrough. They've adapted the cure for atmospheric dispersal. It's accelerated the whole process." Raymond felt a surge of pride for his team. "And the Extremist?" Marek's scales rippled, a sign of discomfort. "We captured their leader. The interrogation revealed a network of resistance cells. It's complicated, but public opinion is shifting. People want peace, Raymond. They want the cure." Over the next few days, Raymond's strength gradually returned. Marek was a constant presence, updating him on the latest developments, and sometimes simply sitting in companionable silence. Raymond found himself looking forward to her visits more and more, their shared experiences forging a bond that transcended their different species. One evening, as Marek was helping Raymond with his physical therapy exercises, she suddenly grew quiet. "Raymond," she said softly, "I need to tell you something." He looked at her, noting the intensity in her gaze. "What is it?" "When you collapsed on that planet, I thought I'd lost you, and I realized—" She paused, seeming to struggle with the words. "I realized how much you mean to me, not just as a colleague or a friend, but—" Raymond felt his heart rate spike, and he knew it wasn't from the exertion of his exercises. He reached out, taking Marek's hand in his. "I know," he said simply. "I feel it too." Their eyes met, and in that moment, the barriers between their species seemed to dissolve. Raymond leaned forward, and Marek met him halfway. Their lips met in a kiss that was both alien and familiar, tender and passionate. When they finally parted, Raymond saw his own mix of emotions reflected in Marek's eyes: joy, uncertainty, hope. They both knew that their relationship would face challenges, but in that moment, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. As Raymond's recovery progressed, he and Marek threw themselves into supporting the cure distribution efforts. They worked with the medical staff to adapt the treatment for a wider range of species, their collaboration serving as an inspiration to others. However, not everyone was pleased with the growing cooperation between humans and remnants. Reports of protests and political maneuvering against the peace process reached the station. Raymond and Marek found themselves becoming symbols of interspecies unity, a role they embraced despite the pressure it brought. Their newfound harmony was shattered one night by the blare of alarms. Raymond, now able to move around the medical bay, rushed to investigate. He found chaos, medical staff scrambling, security forces swarming the corridors. "What's happened?" he demanded, catching the arm of a passing officer. The man's face was grim. "Sabotage. Someone destroyed a large portion of the cure stockpile." Raymond felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. All their hard work, the risks they'd taken, and now this. He immediately began assisting with the investigation, his military training kicking in as he reviewed security footage and interviewed witnesses. The truth, when it emerged, was devastating. The saboteur was a high-ranking member of their own task force, exposing the depth of extremist infiltration. Raymond worked tirelessly with security teams to develop new protocols, pushing himself to the limit despite his still recovering body. As the first reports of successful treatments began to roll in from the target planets, Raymond felt a renewed sense of purpose. The visible success of the cure was changing hearts and minds, eroding prejudices that had existed for generations. Finally cleared for light duty, Raymond stood with Marek in the observation deck, watching as ships departed for various planets, carrying hope in the form of the cure. He turned to her, taking in the willpower in her eyes, the strength of her presence beside him. "We've been assigned a new mission," he said. "A diplomatic task on a Riemann colony world. It's going to be challenging. There's still strong resistance there." Marek nodded, her scales shimmering with a mix of emotions. "But we'll face it together." Raymond smiled, feeling a surge of optimism despite the obstacles ahead. "Together," he agreed, taking her hand in his. As they stood there watching the stars and planning their next move, Raymond knew that their journey was just getting started. The path to peace between humans and Remans would be long and fraught with danger. But looking at Marek, feeling the strength of their bond, he believed that they could make a difference. One step at a time, one world at a time, they would build a future where their two species could coexist in harmony. Harmony. Raymond and Marek stepped off the transport onto the soil of Vexar Prime, the key Riemann colony world that would make or break their diplomatic mission. The air was thick with tension as they made their way through the spaceport, acutely aware of the hostile glares from the Reman populace. "Not exactly a warm welcome," Raymond muttered, his hand instinctively moving closer to his sidearm. Marek's scales rippled with unease. "I expected resistance, but this—" Their attempts to arrange a meeting with the colony's leadership were met with outright refusal. Messages went unanswered. Official channels remained closed. It became clear that traditional diplomacy wouldn't work here. "We need to change tactics," Raymond said, pacing their small quarters. "If they won't listen to us directly, we'll make them listen through action." Marek nodded, her eyes lighting up with understanding. "A public demonstration. Show them the cure's effectiveness where they can't ignore it." Within hours, they had set up a makeshift medical station in Vexar Prime's main square. Word spread quickly, and a crowd began to gather, a mix of curiosity and hostility palpable in the air. Raymond stood tall beside Marek, ignoring the lingering pain from his recent injuries. He addressed the growing crowd, his voice strong and clear. "People of Vexar Prime, we come bearing not weapons or threats, but hope. A cure that knows no species, no politics. Today, we'll show you its power." Marek stepped forward, gesturing to a group of visibly ill Raymans who had volunteered for the treatment. "These are your people, suffering from the same disease that has plagued both our species. Watch closely." As the cure was administered, a hush fell over the square. Minutes ticked by, tension mounting. Then before their eyes, the patients began to show signs of improvement. Color returned to pale scales, labored breathing eased, and strength visibly returned to weakened bodies. Murmurs of astonishment rippled through the crowd. Raymond caught snippets of conversation. "It's working. How is this possible? We need this cure." The success of the demonstration created a seismic shift in public opinion. Citizens began approaching Raymond and Marek, asking questions, sharing stories of sick loved ones. The hostility in their eyes gave way to hope. Sensing the change, Raymond and Marek pressed their advantage, requesting another meeting with the colony's governing council. This time, faced with mounting public pressure, the council agreed. The council chamber was a grand, imposing room, its walls adorned with Riemann historical artifacts. Raymond and Marek stood before the stern-faced council members, ready to make their case. As Marek began her presentation, a commotion erupted outside. Suddenly, the doors burst open, and a group of armed extremists stormed in, weapons raised. "Death to the human scum!" one of them shouted, aiming at Raymond. Time seemed to slow. Raymond's military training kicked in as he dove for cover, pulling the nearest council member with him. Marek moved with lightning speed, her combat skills on full display as she disarmed the first attacker. The room erupted into chaos. Raymond used a fallen chair as a makeshift shield, protecting council members as he maneuvered towards the attackers. Marek was a blur of motion, her scales gleaming as she took down extremist after extremist. Working in perfect tandem, Raymond and Marek subdued the attackers, securing the room in a matter of minutes. As the dust settled, they found themselves standing before the council, breathing heavily but unharmed. The council members looked at them with newfound respect. The lead counselor, an elderly Raymond named Kraz, spoke first. "It seems we owe you our lives," he said, his voice gravelly. "Perhaps it's time we truly listen to what you have to say." Marek stepped forward, her scales still flushed from the fight. She began to speak, her voice filled with passion and conviction. "I once stood where you stand now," she said, distrustful of humans, seeing them only as the enemy, but working alongside Raymond, seeing his dedication, his willingness to risk everything for both our peoples. It changed me. Our collaboration led to this cure, a miracle that could save millions of lives. Imagine what more we could achieve together. Raymond followed with a pragmatic presentation, outlining the economic and social benefits of peace. He spoke of shared resources, technological advancements, and the strength that comes from unity. As they finished, silence filled the chamber. The council members exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. Finally, Kraz spoke. "You have given us much to consider," he said. "We will need time to deliberate, but perhaps there is a path forward after all." Days later, the council reconvened. In a historic decision, they agreed not only to accept the cure, but to support the broader peace initiative. The news spread like wildfire across Vexar Prime and beyond. As Raymond and Marek prepared to leave the colony, they found themselves surrounded by grateful citizens. Children presented them with local flowers. Families shared stories of hope restored. The hostility that had greeted their arrival had transformed into cautious optimism. Boarding their ship, Raymond turned to Merrick, a smile playing on his lips. "One world down," he said. "Think we can do this a few more times?" Merrick's scales shimmered with amusement. "With you, I think we can do anything." As their ship lifted off, leaving Vexar Prime behind, news of their success was already spreading to other colonies. The path ahead was still long and undoubtedly filled with challenges, but for the first time in generations, true peace between humans and Raymonds seemed within reach. Their next destination appeared on the navigation screen. Earth. A historic summit awaited them, one that would shape the future of both their species. Raymond and Merrick exchanged a look of persistence, ready to face whatever came next, together.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.